Welcome to the ClassCast podcast, where philosophy, policy, pedagogy, and people come together in honest, purposeful conversations about improving school and education for our students and our communities. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens, an award-winning English teacher, speaker, tutor, and podcast host in Northern Virginia. You can listen and subscribe to the ClassCast podcast on all major streaming services, on YouTube, and at classcastpodcast.com. Ladies and gentlemen, class is in session. Welcome to the ClassCast podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. Today, we'll be speaking with Jeff Harris, the co-founder and president of Xello, which is kind of a career readiness and a student preparation. I don't know, what's the right word, Jeff? Do we call it a service? Is it an app? You're doing a lot of things, and I've done some reading about it, but having not used the program, the software myself, I'm actually a little curious about that. So first, thanks for being here, and then tell us, what is Xello?
Yeah, sounds great, Ryan. That's a good place to start. First of all, thanks so much for having me. Really a pleasure to be here with you. So Xello is, and maybe educators who are participating here today and are listening will be familiar with kind of like having a career guidance program in the school. Most typically you see it in high school, but we do now serve K through 12, really allowing districts to have this full K to 12 career development experience for their students. And yeah, I mean, I think career development software, it's a subscription service. So school districts will pay on an annual basis and let all of their students and educators have access to it. And really the goal is to just help students get a sense of career direction and make career plans. A lot of times we really fixate on the end of that journey when students are picking their post-secondary destination. That's the part that gets a lot of attention. Are you going to college? Are you going into the workforce?
What's your major?
Where are you applying to, and all of that. So, but we're pretty big believers in starting early and laying a real foundation. The program's organized around a pretty simple model, which is building a foundation of self-knowledge and self-awareness. So it's really hard to chart your path if you don't know who you are and kind of what you want. So that's an important piece. And there's a lot of overlap there with social emotional learning, just self-awareness and things like that. And then it's exploration. So, what are your options out there in the world of work, and just giving students a chance to explore and be aware of all the different things that they could do. And then it's, how do you make a plan to get there? So, where do you want to go, and what are the steps you need to take? Everything from planning your courses to eventually planning your post-secondary path. And yeah, so that's kind of what the program does.
That's awesome. I'm just curious, like, as kind of a ballpark number, what's sort of the number of career options that are included? Like, are we working out of a list of 200, of 500, 5,000? Like, because that's part of what makes this so complicated, is that some students think I have so many options. And then some students either don't see options in their community, or their parents are only really promoting 3, like, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be an engineer, and that's it, and so the kids don't even know these other options. So like, what's the range of sort of perspectives and experiences you provide?
Yeah, it's such a great point, and really insightful, because it truly is an issue. So there are about 600 careers in our database, and there's any one of those careers you could get more granular. So let's say you're talking about being a high school teacher, and then you could be a phys ed teacher, or you could be an English teacher. So students probably don't need to know about that. They don't need to figure that out quite yet.
If they decide they're education, First of all, discourage that, and anybody who's going into it, be a gym teacher, please.
Okay. So so about 600, but you're absolutely right. Like, what's that tipping point to when, like, the complexity becomes a problem? The nice thing about it, of course, is there's like a career for everybody, right? There's something that fits everybody, and it's and that kind of opportunity is great. So you might be interested in design, but maybe you're also interested in, like, biology and plants. So what about landscape design, right? Or maybe you're more interested in engineering and product and design. So maybe you're going to be an industrial designer. So, like, if you can manage that complexity and break it down for students and just make it something they can digest, it can be really good for them, but it can also be overwhelming. So you have to be careful.
Yeah. How, and well, I don't know if there is an answer to this question, but do you try to adjust for sort of the maturity issue? And when I say that, I mean, like, I have students, I have friends who, going through high school were not that serious as students, and they, whatever. And
Yeah,
it's maybe in their mid or late 20s, and all of a sudden they find their thing, and if
yeah,
they work hard, maybe you start late, but you work hard, if you're good at it, you can still get it done. Um, but some people maybe aren't ready for that when they're
yeah.
16 or 17 or earlier. Is there any way to adjust for that, or is that something you guys account for?
I mean, yeah, I think so. Like, there's lots of different ways to use the software, and again, that's a great point that you raised. And there are actually like career maturity surveys that you can do to find out where students are at in that spectrum. And and so there are different ways that they can use the program. Some aren't ready for um, you know picking a college or focusing on a post-secondary destination. They're better off just flipping through the database of careers and maybe listening to interviews with people who work in different fields of work to kind of see what sticks with them. So there's different ways to use the software. I think for us, this is really why we focus so much on starting early and starting in the elementary years, is to try to get people more level set, like level the playing field a bit, so you don't have people up here and people down here just because of what they've been exposed to or what their maturity is, because they've all been exposed to it kind of, at different times throughout their school career. So it doesn't seem like something strange to them. It seems like part of their education. It's normal to think about kind of who you are and what you like. It's normal to think about who does what in the community and what you find interesting. So trying to normalize that and make it part of education and build that muscle, with
Yeah.
with students, I think helps avoid that situation where, as you say, you've got the 16-year-old who's just not in that headspace at all, which is it's kind of a scary spot to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's tricky because the sense of opportunity can vary so much, like community to community, and geographically it doesn't even have to be far. You can move from one side of a city to another,
Mhm.
and what young people think their options are can be
Yeah,
wildly different. And
yeah,
to help them understand that you have, especially I'm thinking about students who see fewer opportunities, to help them understand what those options are, and then to learn how to start accessing them, and what are the steps to get there. And starting early, I think, is massively important, because that's one of those things when we think about, how do we help. I don't like this. I hear people use the, like dysfunctional or broken communities or things. I don't like those terms, but there are places that are economically depressed and have been for decades. And, if you want to break that cycle, then someone in the community has to see economic opportunity and take advantage of it.
Mhm.
And so there's this chance sort of that starting early and sort of showing students here are real actionable steps to take to get there, is not only serving the individual, but possibly serving that broader community as well. But sometimes it's a
Mhm.
tough pitch. So you guys, I know on your website you talk a lot about engagement, and I'm gonna there's a number that I saw a few different times on there that I think is really interesting. um, you say, your studies and your research says that your service gets approximately 14 times the engagement of the average educational software,
Mhm.
which can mean a lot of different things. there's a,
Can
there's
mean
a
a lot
lot
of
of
things.
not so engaging educational software, but that's
Yeah.
that's not a knock on you, that's a knock on them.
Mhm.
When you think about how you get students buying in, like, how do you get that engagement, and maybe particularly how do you get that engagement for the kids who maybe need it the most?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And maybe just before I get into that, I feel compelled to comment on what you're just
Sure.
saying about the exposure that students get. And, as you say, it may be a disadvantaged community, but it may also just be, you know, the other end of the spectrum. And all you see are, again, a particular subset of occupations. That's just all you're exposed to. And a lot of research shows that early exposure really does um, inform students' future choices. Like it creates a bias right from the beginning. They just believe that certain options are not realistic for them, and they start to exclude those options or undervalue those options. So it really, that exposure is so important. It could be someone in a rural setting that just sees a handful of careers because that's there's just not a lot of diversity in the labor market. So that early exposure is absolutely critical. Um, in terms of how you get engagement, and like there's a lot to it, and I think, as you said, oftentimes educational software, there are just implementation challenges. Like there's a lot of, to use an old term, like shelfware, where it just doesn't get properly utilized. And so there's a lot of pieces to that. Like a lot of it is about the actual implementation more than it is about the software. It's how we as a company work with educators to, help them, bring it to life in the classroom. So that piece is just as important as what you do inside the software. And so how you support schools is critically important to begin with. And one of the ways that you drive utilization is to really tie the program to core workflows within a school. So whether that's course planning and course scheduling, which we can do within the system, or meeting strategic imperatives for a district or state requirements around career development, or making it really easy to teach a careers class if you have a careers class in the curriculum. So bring that to life with the built-in lessons that we have. So a lot of that engagement really starts to stay very close to the needs of educators and administrators, and making sure that the tool makes their lives easier. So that's one lever. And then the whole other side of it is the student engagement, which often gets ignored because students aren't the ones who write the checks. And so, you see educational software companies really catering to the educators and administrators as they should. But, we really believe that other lever that you have to pay attention to is the student, and making sure that they connect with the software. It's especially important for us because we want career planning to go from being something that students have to do as part of their school activity to being something that they want to do, and they feel empowered to take control of their future. So we do everything we can, from the research that we put in to the user experience, looking at different ways of presenting information and creating experiences for students that they find rewarding, that they find valuable. So we're really coming at it from both perspectives, meeting the needs of the education system, like get things done, make it easy, that sort of thing, to make it really relevant and meaningful for the student.
Yeah, that's and I like the relevant piece, because that's I teach 11th and 12th grade English, and that's day one. I hit them. I'm like, look, you're in, most of you are in this class because you have to be, like, unless it's an AP class where you had to take English to graduate. And if we're being honest, at least half of you wouldn't be here if you weren't forced. And they're like, and I'm like, right. But this is also the one class I can guarantee that you're going to benefit from. Like, all your classes are great. You should learn all this stuff. I'm just saying every one of you is going to use communication skills. Not all of you is going to use certain other subject areas or classes. And they started like, okay, all right. And then, and we talk through like, what is the economic benefit to you of being a good communicator, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, so a kid who has no interest in English class suddenly says like, but I could make more money, get easier promotions if I can interview better, and I can do this. Mm-hmm. And so, and they're old enough to see that. They don't necessarily know what they want to do yet, all of them, but they see the benefit of here's the skill, right? Here's the thing. And this is how it serves me. And I get a lot of good buy-in that way, because I'm very honest with them. I'm like, look, this one's not going to be fun, but here's why it's important that we do it. And, and they play along. Like, I don't have to pretend everything's going to be amazing. I just have to let you know why this has value. And I think sometimes we, just anyone in education, particularly teachers, but sometimes ed tech companies, things like that, sort of push so hard to make everything look like it's fun that sometimes you just like, let's be honest, job searches are not always fun, but we need to do it. We need to know how to do it well. And wouldn't it be great if you had already narrowed your focus to a particular field, rather than say, well, I could do any one of these million things. That student experience is important. And when I say engagement or student experience, like I said, it's not that it has to be all the bells and whistles and the most fun thing. It's just, it has to be valuable. And when students see that, that's where I think a lot of engagement comes from, because they understand that it serves them. They're not doing the work to serve the teacher, getting the grade to serve their parents. I'm doing this because this serves me. And I think that you get a lot more students who take things seriously, particularly your older students, when they see that sort of value to them. They see the sort of the long-term play there.
For sure. I should have had you as my English teacher. I think it would have helped a lot. I mean, it's so great that you take the time to explain the why, right?
Yeah.
Like here's why you're here. Here's how this is going to help you. And it's not a hard sales pitch, but not that many teachers I don't know take the time to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. I had one of the smartest kids I've ever taught. It's probably my third, fourth year teaching. Like she now holds, I think, like 2 doctorates or something, way smarter than me. And she said at the end of the year, I always do student feedback. And she said, I always say, what can I do better? And her number one thing was, I wish you wouldn't waste the first 5 to 10 minutes telling us what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I actually pulled her aside. I talked to her about it. And she's like, I thought they were anonymous. And I was like, yeah, but you got weird handwriting. So here we are. And I said, no, it's cool. I said, but if I explain to you why I do it, can you tell me if you still think it's a bad idea? And she's like, all right. I said, because you're going to do it no matter what. And I have to go out of my way to make this hard for you. For everyone else, there's a challenge. I said, I have to let them know why it's worth the challenge, like why it's worth the work. So by explaining it well in the first place, we get way more done for the rest of the class. She's like, that makes sense. You can keep doing it. I was like, all right, I feel so much better. I don't want to waste anybody's time. But those moments, like for me, I think are very important because we have to remember as teachers that we're serving students in the community, and say as educational technology providers, or really anybody, providing any kind of tools, we have to remember sort of who we're serving. How often do you and your sales team, how often do you see students in the adoption meetings? Like how often are kids at the table when the district is trying to decide, are we going to adopt the software or not? Like, are kids included in that very often?
Oh yeah, what a great question. I wish they were part of it more often. It's not that common. Let's say I'm going to say 20 to 25% of the time. And we've seen some districts, and we just love to see it, where it's just very inclusive. So it's the guidance counselors who you would normally expect to be part of this. Like the two primary suspects are guidance counselors and CTE teachers. Those are the ones who are closest to this. So they're typically going to be involved. Amazingly, sometimes they're not both involved. It can be really siloed, and it's one or the other. We love it when it's both. And then beyond that, bringing in educators from across the curriculum, because they're going to take kind of a whole school approach to career development, which is great. And then bringing students in to get their perspective, and then bringing parents in to get their perspective as well. So we've seen that, and that we love that, just because those are all stakeholders in this process. And I think we do, personally, I think we do better in those situations, because I feel like we do quality work, and it's more likely to get recognized when you have more people in that decision-making process. But I would say, to answer your question, is kind of 20 to 25% of the time. And I understand that too, because like one of the things I'm always amazed about is how educators and administrators even find the time to do these evaluations, because I know how busy educators are, and I know how difficult these evaluation processes are, to look at a bunch of different applications and go in depth around the specifications and do that testing and sit through product demos and have a scoring mechanism, and then manage the red tape with the purchasing office. Like, it's really a lot. It's a miracle that it gets done. So I have a lot of sympathy for that. The districts that can resource a broader evaluation with more stakeholders, that's fabulous.
Yeah, that you're right. You say it's a miracle that it gets done, and then sometimes I'm skeptical, and I'm like, did that get done? Did we? Did anyone look at this before we bought it? Did we bought it because it sounded cool? The county next door used it. A good friend of mine works for Canvas learning management system, and he was the first episode after the pandemic was declared. It was like episode I think it was 20 or 21. It was like school shut down, and the next day I had my buddy John on the call, and I was like, all right, man, so we need to talk because everybody's gonna do this. And one of the things that he and I have talked about in an ongoing manner is how that adoption process goes, and how he wishes that there were more teachers involved and way more students. And so anytime I'm talking to someone about ed tech, I always think that's something that's worth talking about. How does that look? But I also find that companies that sort of lean harder on high engagement, and students like this tend to say, we wish we had more students there. When the tool you're providing is something that streamlines the teacher's workflow, maybe you don't need the students there, so you don't really think that, that's fine, that makes sense. But when we're putting something directly in the hands of students, I always think like, man, how do we make that decision and not have any kids in the room, or at least five, or
Yeah.
something that it's a tricky thing, when really in the end those are the people we're trying to serve with this. um
Yeah, and I think what you're also getting at a bit there too is just the like the value of the investment in the evaluation process that leads to better adoption. So like it feels like it's hard to do that really thoughtful evaluation and bring a lot of people in, and it truly is. It's more resource intensive, but you're basically setting the stage for a successful adoption by making that investment.
yeah, and you also need that follow through, and that's another big part of this, where my buddy John talked about this. I've talked about this actually with a few guests on the show here, that there has to be that ongoing relationship. It's not just, here's the product, we sell it, we're done. Like, there has to be
Yeah,
training on how to implement it, because
yeah,
handing someone a tool is not necessarily going to change anything if they don't know how to use the tool right. Or if you give someone
yeah,
a great piece of technology with 1,000 ways to implement, and they know three of them, that's not a flaw in the design of the software. That's a flaw in how it was delivered, right? And
yeah.
that extra training piece. You mentioned sort of
Mhm.
having, say, counselors, CTE teachers involved. Do you guys do that work, or like, is there a training program, or how does that
Mhm.
work? Because you could have the best service in the world, but if the people who are handing it to the students don't set it up right, or they don't pitch it to the kids the right way, it probably
Yeah.
flops. So, like, what does that relationship look like?
Oh yeah, no, it's like it's really close. Like it's really intimate. I mean, it's hand in hand. It is a true partnership, and it has to be. And I can remember when we first started with these methods that I'll kind of describe in a minute to answer your question. Some educators just weren't used to that, like working with, like, I bought the software, we'll figure it out. It's like, no, no, no. Like we're together now. Like we're locked,
Yeah.
and you're going to be working with us all the time, because otherwise it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And so there's so many pieces to it. I mean, it starts with our onboarding team, which configures the software and does all the technical integration. And that's really just about providing, you have to be just technically strong. You have to be able to integrate with any platform, have SSO with any platform, just make it really simple, and be able to, like, some districts have a great tech staff, and then smaller districts, they just don't have that depth of expertise. So you have to be able to really hold their hand and show them exactly how to do it. So first of all, it's just removing any of those barriers by being able to provide those services for them. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is establishing a relationship with a point person in the district and our success manager at the company. And basically those two, we're going to bring lots of people into the picture over time, but those two are going to really drive it, and they're going to be tight. So we build that relationship. And then there's really implementation planning, which is, and building a success plan for a district, really prioritizing what's the most important thing you need to get done with this software this year. Like, what are the two main reasons you bought it, and let's make sure that those happen. And do you have the bandwidth to do more than that this year? No, you don't. No problem, right? If we get these things done, you'll be happy. It'll be a success. So let's focus on those two things, and then let's build out an implementation plan to make that happen. Here's who's going to do what, when that will happen, and then the training plan is part of that. So these people will need to get trained, and need to get trained at this time. So those are some of the pieces, but it's a very, very tight relationship with a lot of districts. It's daily phone calls, daily emails at critical times of the year until they get some momentum. Yeah, it's a ton of fun. It's great. It's great to have those relationships.
Once you have that sort of up and running, and once you're confident that, say, the counselors in a given school sort of know what they're doing, and they're using the product well,
Mhm.
what is, like, say, the counselor or the CTE teacher's role? I mean, how much work, and this is a question specific to your software, right? 'Cause every
Yeah.
every tool is going to work differently here, but how much of this is something that the counselor or teacher needs to do with the students or walk them through, versus how much of this is sort of talk them through it, get them set up, and then students sort of work independently through the service? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, there's some flexibility there just to accommodate what a district is capable of doing. So, sometimes the activities, so there's a student dashboard, there are pre-built lessons that we've made that are really self-directed. And so if a district, and this happened a lot during COVID, where you just don't have the students in the classroom. So it's really putting the activities on the student dashboard and reinforcing for them that these are the things they must complete, and leaving it to them to do it. That's a very hands-off approach. Then of course, if you do have the opportunity to work with those students, you can use our lesson plans to set the table for the student, tell them what they're about to do, the value of what they're going to do. They go and complete the lesson on their own, or they do it in class. You bring them back in and you debrief and put it in context for them. So that's one way. Some of the workflow components, which are course planning, course selection that students would do in the tool. Again, a lot of it is self-directed, but you're going to have the counselors really staying on top of student progress, being able to go in and look at who's completed their plan, who hasn't. Once they've completed their plan, they're going to make sure it's an appropriate plan for that student before they approve it. So in a situation like that, where it's a workflow, or another example of a workflow is the college application process, again, where the counselor is going to monitor students' work. Students are going to be sending through requests to submit transcripts. So they're really just administering the system and staying on top of student progress. And that's a much more kind of hands-on experience.
Nice. Yeah. And that level of flexibility is probably good because it's going to look different in different places. Yeah. And you've been talking, you said that, the adoption is generally district or county wide. Do you do work with like private schools or smaller school systems, like where it is maybe just an independent school or something like that? Is that a relationship that you've had, that you work with people in that situation?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. We do that as well. Yeah.
So I'm curious with it, just because, obviously the adoption process is a little different, and scaling, the product and everything is going to be different. But there's sort of this, I don't know if it's an ongoing debate or if it's sort of up and coming kind of thing, but as there's been sort of more of a push, I mean, probably to a certain extent everywhere, but definitely in the United States, there's this big push towards like school choice and creating more options, for people to choose what school their kids go to. There's been increased interest in, I don't know, people call it different things, classical education or traditional education, liberal education, which sort of goes back to sort of the traditional model of we're learning our subjects. There's more memorization. We're learning the classics. We're doing philosophy, things like that. And the argument in a lot of those schools and from a lot of those people is that that education is meant to sort of teach something bigger, that it's not just job training. There's supposed to be this sort of sense of purpose in life. And you get that a lot in religious schools, but also sort of a sense of what is beautiful or what is just or things like that. Not that they're not also doing some career training, but I think a lot of public schools have shifted into this like job training, STEM focus sort of mindset. And some people are starting to push back against that a little bit and leaning back towards these more sort of traditional classical views, maybe things a little more philosophical. Your product would work in either place because realistically everyone needs a job, right? But like, where do you see that debate going, or like how does your company and your product fit in there? Everyone needs a job, but the philosophy of different schools is starting to diverge on this point. Are we here to prep people for jobs, or are we here to prep people to be good people? Like, is that a divide that you've seen, or is that something you have to deal with?
There's lots of those kinds of issues, and different biases that exist around career choice, and I mean, we've had, I can remember like some districts where they send, 95% of their students to four-year college, and we have careers in there, that people need to do, right? Like, like being a short order cook, or being a waste collector, right? These are careers that exist in our community. And so you'll get pushback in some of these places saying, that's not what is appropriate for our kids.
Do they ever
So
ask you to take them out?
yeah, they do. They do. And so we try to stay really agnostic. Like we are, we're serving up the facts. This is what's available. These are the schools that are available. These are the programs that are available. These are the careers that are available based on the labor market information. They should be represented, and so we're trying to give choice. We're trying to give information and choice. And so I think, I think we do our best to stay out of those debates.
Probably
And
smart.
yeah, because it would be tough. We have our own ideas for sure. I mean, I think the thing that, the philosophy probably that is most meaningful for us is just the idea that people should really understand who they are and what makes them tick, and that there's such a diversity of options out there for you. It's about finding fit, and it's not like what's the best choice, what's the best career, the one that fits. That's the goal. But you get people, there's all kinds of biases that flow through at different times. Like maybe, as you say, STEM is all the rage, or now it's all about the skilled trades, and then of course, like the one that never goes away is like, you need to go to an Ivy League school. Like that's how you get your future set. So there's like waves of these things that happen. And, I just kind of feel like if we can help people find what fits for them, that we're doing our job.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's great because, as you said, I think you want to sort of point to what options are available, and, no one should be upset about the information. I mean, unless
Right.
all of the options look bad to you. I mean, that's a cultural or economic issue. That's something else, right?
Yes.
But yeah, just sort of presenting it. I was just curious because I talked to, I don't remember what episode it was, a while back. I had it somewhere. It's 30 something. It was a while ago, but Jeremy Wayne Tate, who's a great follow on Twitter, by the way. I probably agree with half or less than half of what he says. But it almost always makes me think, and he pushes hard for sort of that classical education and all that kind of stuff. And the idea that school isn't just there to provide, job training. But I almost think in a way, it's almost counterintuitive, but like your service is maybe even more valuable in that situation where like your classes are not talking about how this sets you up for a job. They're talking about sort of enlightenment, or this is what the world, this is how the world works, or this is our religious philosophy, or whatever that may be. If the classes aren't going to hit on the job stuff, then wouldn't it be really great if you had this program? Like your service would almost be more valuable in a school that isn't pushing a particular trade or STEM or something like that. I just wonder if they would be open to it. I don't know what that feeling is, but I feel like the service would be even more important there.
I think you're 100% right. And that's how that would reflect my own experiences too, in a way. Like if you're in a school to be a pilot, to be an airline pilot, like you're pretty set, right? Or you're in a program that is focused on engineering or whatever it may be, right? You're pretty set. But if you're coming in with the liberal arts education, you've got a lot of options, and so you probably need to do that exploration. It's funny, I was also thinking, just hearing you talk about that, back again to my own experiences, and really the fairly early days of tech, because we've been doing this for 25 years. And a lot of the people who came into our business in the very early days, and some of them are still here, came from like just a really strong liberal arts background. And they're like the utility hitter, right? Like they can do anything, right? They have a curiosity, they know how to research, they know how to solve problems. And it took the people with that kind of educational background, I think, to build a lot of our company.
Yeah. And I hear that a lot. And I would never discourage someone from specializing in something, especially if you really like it, you're really good at it. But I also hear people, oh, don't, who's going to be an English major, who's going to be a philosophy major. And it's like, it's not about having that specific job. The statistic fluctuates, but I think it's always somewhere around 60% of people with a college degree have a job that is mostly unrelated to what they studied. Sometimes it's the skills you're picking up, and a lot of times like the soft skills that you're picking up, and the like you said, knowledge of yourself and time management, all those things become really important. And what you actually study in some cases takes a backseat to it. But again,
Yeah.
if you are, a little bit suited to a lot of things, then having some assistance in picking what you're actually going to end up doing would certainly be useful.
Yes.
In that last question, we kind of hit at, the idea that there's a lot of different ideas about what it is we're trying to do in schools. Is this enlightenment? Is this a religious view? Is this job training? Are we just trying to build competent citizens? People have all different ideas. For you, when you think about what we're doing with students in schools, and obviously you work with a lot of different schools, so I'm not asking you to speak for them, but for you personally, what do you think the purpose of school should be? Like, what are we trying to do here?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough question, and I'd say it's like it's all of the above that you mentioned. Certainly, there's so many pieces to it. Depends what lens you take. I mean, you can see it as a tool for social mobility. You can see it as how we prepare people to be good citizens. How we develop that rigorous skill set. Maybe you're studying literature, but you can then apply that that rigor to just about anything. So education does all of those things. It's a place for social development, and I think I feel like we really saw during the pandemic how much education is a pillar in the community. It's a place for students to go. It's a place where good things happen for them. There's a support structure for them. So it's so many things. I mean, if I had to pick the one thing that that really resonates with me, and how I'd maybe evaluate whether good education is happening or not, it's is it lighting a fire for those students? Like, is it getting them excited about learning? Is it like opening those doors for them to make them more curious? Like, or is it shutting that down? Is it taking the natural curiosity that students have and closing the door on that, or is it like stoking that fire? Because if you think about, let's say you go through 4 years of education and you're focused on the curriculum and you're focused on meeting certain learning outcomes, once those 4 years are done, the learning stops. But if you stoke that fire, you've created something that keeps burning, right? And hopefully can intensify. So I like that idea of lighting the fire and just like opening up that world.
Yeah. And that can look a lot of different ways, and it probably requires, I would say on average, it requires more flexibility than most schools provide students. And some of that's limitations of staffing or funds, or it's limitations of what has been required by your state legislature. You have to have these classes and whatever. There's a lot of things that kind of bind us in ways that make it difficult to figure out what is appropriate for and useful for each student. But that you're right, that sort of the build both the skills and the curiosity, I think, are really important. There was all this talk. I mean, it's starting to fade now, but there was all this talk about learning loss, just learning loss, like through the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I mean, for some kids, that's an issue. And I think you can look at particularly at math scores and say, it's a concern, but it's not really learning loss. It was just learning different stuff. Like when kids all of a sudden are home and maybe their parents aren't home, or the parents are home and we all have to figure out how to, adapt it. People learned a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
It just wasn't what was on the standardized test that we were using to test it. So when they say learning loss, I'm like, well, no, you learned something different. And we can say that that's more or less valuable, but I would never say you didn't learn anything. The question is, how much of this is going to carry forward? People say, oh, look, the kids are 4 months behind on their math test at the end of 4th grade. I'm like, take a 25-year-old and give them a math test on anything from high school, and they're all going to fail it.
Exactly.
A lot of that's lost anyway. Not that the learning was bad. I think about school like going to the gym. It's not, which I should do more, but it's not like, it's you don't have to remember every workout. You don't have to set a personal record every day. You keep going, you keep doing it. You're honing your mind, you're honing your skills. And I think that's a lot of what school does. Not to say we don't want people to remember specific facts. A lot of this is sort of a more of an experiential thing that sort of shapes you as a person than maybe walking away with this very specific knowledge set that, a lot of people are going to forget. But, I mean, for you guys, like I think the impressions that students get about their interests, their abilities, their options can be important. I still remember a career what did they call it? It's like a career inventory thing we did in like middle school. And it was like
Yeah.
this little classroom set up and it had like 8 tables. And you went around and you got like a couple days to go in and you got to solder something and change the oil on a lawnmower and do some very, very, very primitive like computer coding. And at the end, they gave you
It's
a little
cool.
printout that said, it was a cool idea. They gave you a printout and said, this is what it seems like you're best at. But I
Oh,
was in like 7th or 8th grade. And the
oh,
thing that I was
yeah.
best at was changing the oil on the lawnmower, which is really funny because I am horribly, horribly disinclined to mechanical sort of work. I mean, I can change the oil on a lawnmower, but
Yeah.
I look back on that now and I'm like, for a while, I was really thinking like I could be a mechanic or I could be something like that because I took it as like it's gospel, like this is the thing I'm
I
set up to
know.
be.
I
And I
know.
never forgot that experience. For you guys, like when you think we just want to light that fire, get them interested, get them curious, get them motivated, do you ever worry that kids maybe take the wrong message away or they remember the wrong parts of that experience?
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. It's a, if you ask most students, you start talking about career development, or adults talking about career development, they'll say something similar to what you said. I took this assessment at one time and it said I should be, X. And it's like, that didn't make any sense at all. It was a terrible experience. So you hear a lot of those kind of comments. And I think the field has a bit of a legacy problem in the sense that, that historically it's a pretty kind of quote unquote scientific approach to a very complex human problem,
Yeah.
and it doesn't feel great, right? So I think there's a lot of legacy of that. We do our very best to not slip into that, but it's a risky thing. So just to give you an example, like one way that you can try to avoid that trap is just the whole approach to like a career interest inventory or some kind of career survey. And one is to have this very psychometric measured approach where it's like, here's your list, like, well, there you go, that's what you should do. Whereas for us, it's really about presenting a list of options, but the most important thing you find out in that process is why any of these careers in the database may or may not be suitable for you based on your interest. and
Right.
and so it's not saying like this is a fit, this is not a fit. It's just like, let's find out why, and let's understand that and how your interest can affect which careers may or may not be a fit for you. And it's kind of that discovery process rather than saying, here you go, this is the end state,
Yeah.
and take this list and do what you will with it. So it is a discovery process, and so I think the field is changing in that sense, and it's pretty healthy.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes even giving, I like how you sort of focus on here's why, because I'm thinking of 2 students in particular where the one kid, for example, wanted to be a doctor. And, I mean, the whole time I'm like, you're a nice kid, but I would never let you give me medical advice. Like, I don't care how much school you go to, buddy, like not
Yeah,
happening,
yeah,
and the kid's chemistry teacher would like, they were talking after class one day, the kid was struggling. And the kid kept coming back to not like, I need to learn this or I don't understand it. It was, well, I'm going to need this to be a doctor. And the chemistry was like, look, let's just be honest. You're not going to be a doctor, right?
yeah,
You're bad at chemistry. You're bad at like, this is
yeah,
not going to work out. But what was interesting was it actually, it was like a little moment of reality. And the kid was like, oh, well, I either need to
yeah,
change my path or I need to get better at and get serious. And the kid like started working crazy hard. And all of a sudden the attitude changed, the progress changed. That was one of those times that tough love may have actually been love. Like
yeah,
sometimes we
100%.
we disguise abuse as tough love. And but, explaining why these are the things on your list, not saying you have to choose this or that. Here are the things you seem interested in or predisposed to. That's maybe a softer approach because it still empowers the student to make the decision. It doesn't feel like it's
Yeah,
something you're destined for. This, it's here's what it looks like now. You're 16 and this could change.
yeah, no, that's exactly right. And as a student, again, I would have valued that honesty from your teacher like that is really, really nice and really helpful. But it is very much like that, and a lot of times it is, you're just trying to have those eye-opening experiences. So I mean, you complete the survey, and you've always wanted to be, in this case it was a doctor, you wanted to be an elementary school teacher, let's say, just nowhere to be found on your list. So why is that? So let's go and take a look why. Well, it says that you really don't like working with kids that much. So what is it? I mean, that's a ridiculous example, of course, but so what is it that attracts you to being an elementary school teacher, given that you don't like these aspects of it? And it's like, well, I never really thought about it that way.
Like,
Right.
summer, I don't know.
Yeah. Summer. And it's one of the only jobs I know. It's because I see it all the time.
That's right. That's right. There's so many kids who want to be teachers until they leave school and they're like, oh, wait, there's all this other stuff, Exactly. All the adults I know are teachers. So with that, you mentioned there, and you said it earlier in this discussion, you said, when I was a student. So I'm curious, one, what kind of student were you? And two, how did your education lead you to your career path? Like, how did you get into Edtech and career guidance and the rest? But first, what kind of student were you before you got here?
Yeah, so it gets personal. So in high school, I was a terrible student. I was an absolutely terrible student. I was a student who would have benefited from you explaining why I should be in that English class. That would help. That would help me a lot. I wish I was the student who said, "You don't need to tell me this. I'm going for an A+. No, just get out of my way." Having that why would have been really helpful. When I was growing up, I grew up in the country and I wanted to spend all my free time outside being active. And, that's where my curiosity took me, and that's where I was focused. So I was not a good student in high school, but as I entered my senior year, the switch kind of flipped for me a bit to say, like, what's getting real now. It's pretty real. And if I could see what my path might look like without getting focused on education, and can see that, that wasn't maybe going to be that good for me, that wasn't going to be that fun. And I think I started to, whereas I'd probably been evaluating myself in different ways up to that point, I started to evaluate myself based on my academic achievements and see that as part of my identity. And so everything changed for me at that point, and I really started to focus on my studies. And when I went to university, I studied economics, and I was just a bookworm. I mean, I just soaked it all up. I was ready for it at that point, and I had some ground to make up because I hadn't been academic for a number of years, so I really poured myself into my studies, and I really loved it. And I think one of the things that was really helpful for me too is just being around professors who had so much curiosity about their own subject area, and I found that inspiring. And so the curiosity I had about, like, the outside physical world when I was growing up as a kid, I transitioned that curiosity into my learning, and just really enjoyed it. So that's kind of my education experience. It was really fantastic to have that transition happen. But then, curving the road a bit, to your point about liberal arts education, economics is somewhat similar to that. There's a lot of different career paths. There's not one that's cast in stone. And so I had to make some kind of career decision about where I was going to go next. And that wasn't easy. I mean, I knew I loved what I was studying, but I didn't know if I wanted to stay around and do a PhD. I didn't know if, I was going to go work in finance. I really didn't think so. So I had to figure out where to go next. And that's when the next thing I became really curious about was career development, and how do people make these decisions, and how could I help myself?
You're like, I'm experiencing a problem, and
yeah.
I'm gonna be the guy that makes the solution.
It was absolutely a career crisis moment for me. At that time, one of the other co-founders, Matt McQuillan, really good friend of mine, he was studying his MBA and thinking about what he was going to do next, and working on business plans. And so we were sharing lots of ideas, and I said, well, what would be great for me right now is a program that would make it really fun, interesting, and easy to learn about all different careers and make smart choices. So, whenever you're thinking about new ideas, you need to put your skeptics hat on and try to shoot lots of holes in it and say, here's why that won't work. Here's why it's a bad idea, or somebody's done that before. And we just couldn't shoot holes in it. It was like, there's lots of people in that situation. We see lots of recent graduates who don't know what they want to do, or people who went to law school and, decide not to become a lawyer. So I think we're onto something here. And so, that became our focus, is building out that program.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that happens sometimes, like you find your path because you were unsure of your path.
Yeah.
And another tossing a couple of these out, but I have a former student who is Ryan Orr, and I think it was episode like 10 or 11. He great guy, and he went to UVA undergrad, and he wanted to be a doctor his whole life. When I taught him in 11th grade, he was going to be a doctor, and I thought he'd be good at it. And then he went to college, and he was bio pre-med, and he was doing this whole thing, or public health pre-med. And I kept in touch with him through college, and then like it hit him like right before he graduated undergrad, like, I don't think I want to be a doctor. Like, I don't want to go to medical school. And he was left in this like crisis mode, because literally since he was 5 years old, he wanted to be a doctor.
Mhm.
And then it hit him like as he was in the moment where he had to do it, like, I don't actually want to do that. And he found that there were basically no services, aside from basic, campus counseling, which, they say, oh, we'll pick this other major. And he talked to friends, and he realized that like there's a huge number of people who think their whole life, I'm going to be a doctor. And somewhere in the second half of their undergraduate, education, they're like, actually, that's not for me. And he's like, there's nothing there to help you figure out, well, what else can I do with my education and these interests? So he launched a company called Pre-Health Pivot, which is cool. But it's
So
just for
great.
people, very
It's so great.
specific, but it's exactly what you said. Like, well, I need to figure out what I want to do, and I'm having trouble, but we could provide, this could be our service. And his whole thing is getting people right at the end of undergrad. And it's a very specific sort of niche group, but he's like,
Yeah.
he goes, I bet you could go to any college in the country, and between 10 and 20% of the people who are finishing undergrad and thought they were going to be a doctor have changed their mind, and now they don't know what to do. And he's like, I'm trying to build something out to help direct them into productive things you can do, where you didn't just waste the last 4 years of your life. And I was like, that's amazing.
Wow. Wow. I love that. I love that. I've not heard of that, but that's such a great service. And you just kind of intuitively know it's needed, because that's the way medical school works. Like, it's just an academic meat grinder, right? Like, some people are going to be able to cut it and have those grades, and they're going to be able to do it. And some people aren't. And they're brilliant in so many other ways, but just not everyone's cut out for that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
But where do you go? Where do
Yeah,
you go
where do you go?
next?
And when you've defined yourself for so long on this path, like you were like, I'm not sure where I'm going to go. But, imagine just the
Yeah.
opposite. You're like, I
Right.
am going to, work for a Wall Street hedge fund. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, I don't want to. Oh man, like that's not just I'm changing my major. That's that's an identity crisis, and
Yeah.
to have something in that moment to be helpful is good.
Mhm.
To your point and to your service, having something up front to help make sure you're making a good decision in the first place. Not to say no one's ever going to change their mind, but
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
maybe enter into your career or your college or whatever that path is going to be with
Yeah.
maybe a higher degree of confidence, because you knew
Mhm.
what more options were. If I only knew 3 options and I chose one and I didn't like it, I go, oh, I should have chosen one of the other two. There are 600 other careers I could have looked at though,
Yeah.
right? And so maybe part of that is giving people the confidence to make a choice and stick with it, because they had a better understanding what those options were. I mean, like, I think that
Yeah.
for that,
Yeah.
to me, that's a big part of the value it sounds like you're providing, is sort of the confidence and the awareness to move forward and say, I feel good about what I'm doing, not
Oh
just
yeah.
I'm doing it because that's what everyone does, or that's what my dad said I had to do, that someone else can tell you, but if you don't feel it, that's a hard thing to live your
Oh yeah.
life with.
Oh yeah. No, you're very insightful. That is absolutely true. And so, like, maybe an old way of thinking about this would be, again, very mechanical process. So you're good at changing the oil. So you're technically inclined, and that's what you should do. To basically like equipping students with a really strong foundation, first of all, of self-knowledge, right? Like, like, how many people really know what makes them tick, and who puts time into that? How do you even go about that? So you graduate, you think you're going to med school, but all through your education career, you've been going through different exercises and activities that really help you understand who you are. Furthermore, as you say, you've been doing this research, so you know about the range of options that are out there. You know how to how the labor market works, and how it's segmented, and the different places you could go. You have that foundation of knowledge. So you're future ready, right? You're future ready. You're ready to navigate and pivot and kind of do what you need to do, versus not having that background. So So it's not necessarily, because everyone's going to have to make changes. It's not always going to work out the path that you're going down, but if you have that foundation under you, you're ready to do it.
Yeah, you're ready to pivot when you need to, just because you have a solid sort of foundation, like you said, you're ready to move on it. You
Yep.
use the phrase future ready, and this is something that I know you guys use this in your marketing. It's a phrase I think we hear a lot in education.
Yeah.
And I want to sort of roll two questions together, because I ask every guest, what's your ideal school, and so think about that,
Mm,
right? You can get weird with
mm.
it. It could be traditional. I mean, I've had people like, we're going to be on a bus for, it's like, I've had somebody who's like, we're going to do like the magic school bus. It was like, cool,
I like that.
like whatever you think would be a great school. But sort of rolling in with that question, a big part of what you talk about and what you do is help students to be future ready. What is your personal, like, what would be your ideal school if you could set up your own private school and deliver to students? What would it look like? And how does
Yeah.
that relate to the concept of future ready?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question. And you're right. Like future ready is a pretty overused term, and it's used in lots of different ways. For us, it is what we were just talking about, which is like that foundation, right? It's like you're ready to tackle whatever the world throws your way, and with that knowledge that you have about yourself and about the world of opportunities, you're ready to manage it. So that's our version of future ready. In terms of like a school that would develop that, I think for me, I personally really value the connection and continually reinforcing the connection between education and the real world outside the classroom. I worry about those students that just get caught up in education as an institution and don't see the connection to their life and to what's going on outside those walls. So that can take many forms, and I think this is nothing new. I think schools really aspire to do this. I think a lot of people appreciate the value of it. So it could be bringing people from the community into the classroom. It can be things like project-based learning, so students are solving real-world problems, applying their knowledge of physics or whatever it may be. I think a big emphasis on experiential learning, whether that's volunteering or internships or job shadowing. And I do feel like many people intuitively know that these are good things to do, but they're also difficult to coordinate, and they're difficult to scale. So I can appreciate why they're not more commonplace, right? It takes extra effort to make those things happen, but I do feel like those experiences are incredibly valuable for students. It's just like, would you rather read a book about solar power or work on a solar powered car and put it in a competition? Or would you rather read a book about financial literacy or create your family's budget for the year? Like just applying that learning in the real world, and not feeling like you're divorced from that and siloed off in education, but you can see the benefit of learning, and hopefully that's really motivational for students.
And I don't know why I thought of this, but you said you want to build the solar car. We used to do, when I was in high school, it was called the JETS competition. It was junior engineering technology science. I don't know what the S was. But it was always like build something, a little Pinewood Derby car went down the hill, or one year it was a boat, and you had like a milk carton, a straw, a rubber band, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you would do it, and whoever won at the school level, you would go to this like regional competition, and you'd not only, I won my school competition like 3 years in a row.
Whoa.
And then I went to the regional one. I didn't know how to explain any of the math. I never took a physics class. So they'd be like, why is it working? I'm like, well, you see, I put the balloon there and I did this. And they're like, why does that work? And I was like, well, because I get more thrust. And they're like, well, can you show us the math? And I was like, no. And it's one of those times where I'm like, the project-based learning was awesome because I got to play with it. I got to figure it out. It was good.
Right.
Really needed some direct instruction to go alongside that, right? Because there was a technical piece I was missing. And so I always think about that, in my class, like I try to do some of the project-based stuff and make it relevant. At some point, somebody's got to just sort of tell you, here's some of the details. Here's the right way to do certain parts of this. And I think all of one or all of the other is probably a flawed approach. And finding that balance is healthy. I always think about that though. Agreed. I'm like, man, I could build a little boat, man. I just couldn't tell you how it works. And
Yeah,
that's where I probably should have been sitting in a classroom for parts of this, you know. And so hitting the right balance probably varies a lot for student to student, subject to subject. But yeah, I mean, the application
yeah,
piece
that's
is
fair.
big, you know, and it's hard to do, but it seems to be growing in popularity. So if we can plan for it and staff it, you know, I think hopefully your ideal school is idealistic, but not so far fetched that that could not be done. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
I've heard some
yeah.
things where I'm like, well, that's cool, but that's never going to happen. Like this is something that is actionable, which you know I love. Um,
Yeah, the magic school bus would make it pretty efficient to do all these things, but
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah,
How are we gonna do that?
yeah,
So I guess this is my last question before we'll sort of do a final wrap up. But I a few years ago, I forget who did it. It was something, I forget the name of the Institute for some future studies or something. And then I think Harvard did a study and backed it up to a certain extent. And everybody likes to throw around the number. It's something like 85% of the jobs that students will be filling in 2030 or 2040, you know,
yeah.
whatever. Then they say don't exist yet.
Mhm.
And I, you know, first, you know, I just think that's not true. The job might look different. You know, you might do it a different way or use a different tool, but a lot of the jobs will still be there. You'll just do them differently. So I think
Yeah.
that that's a great, you know, sort of clickbait headline to say that and get
Mhm.
people to click and read the article. That being said,
Yeah,
there is some
yeah,
reality to it that, you know, we're right now having a conversation in a way that I could have imagined when I was in high school,
yeah,
but that I didn't think I would actually be doing at any point, you know, before I was very, very, very old. And
yeah,
so sometimes it's hard to predict that. A lot of your talk about future ready is really helping students to prepare for their future and to understand their options and how to handle that. But then there also has to be sort of this broader social piece, which is if we're preparing students for, you know, careers and making these choices, we also have to be realistic about the fact that the job market changes and technology is changing
yeah.
faster than ever and the rate is only increasing. Is that something that you take into consideration when you guys talk about future ready? How much sort of discussion or planning goes into what do we do about these fields that are not, you know, virtual reality, right, is picking up. In 20 years it's going to be exponentially bigger than it is right now.
Yeah,
How do
yeah,
you account for that, say in the software, in discussions with students? Is that something that you do address, you know, sort of thinking cultural future ready versus individual future ready?
yeah. No, it's interesting. I think it's you're right. It gets a lot of attention, and another form of that kind of maybe predates some of the things that you're talking about in terms of how fast jobs are evolving. But it used to be kind of predicting demand, right? Because there used to be people pay attention to the economic cycle, and it's like, now these jobs are really hot, these ones, because the demand is high for these, and you should have been able to time that, then you'd be in the right place at the right time and that sort of thing. So that's kind of like an early version of that, you know, don't you wish you could see into the future, or like the planning you're doing now better be mindful of the fact that it's all going to be different and we're going to pull the rug out from underneath you in
Right.
10 years, right? So it's a different version of that. And even back then, I kind of felt back then the same way I feel about it now, which is like, show me someone who can predict the future. It's you can't do it, right? So I think that is where all of those fundamental and foundational pieces are so important, right? Because if it is, honestly, it is self-knowledge, it is the ability to explore your options and figure out where you want to go and make a plan to get there. Those are the skills that people need. And so it doesn't matter. I mean, if you get placed in a fictional community on Mars one day and you have to make sense of that place, it's like you can figure it out because you know those things, right? You
Right.
know who you are, and you can assess the conditions around you, and you can make a plan to get to where you want to go. Like those are the transferable skills that help you deal with whatever the future holds.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where the focus has to be. And so it in a way, what I the challenge I have with all of that is it's a bit of a distraction. It's almost like a cop out in a way. It's like, well, we don't even know what this future is going to be like,
So
and
why
how,
bother?
yeah. How are we going to prepare? It's going to be all different anyway. So what are we teaching them? It's like, yeah, you're looking in the wrong place, right? You're
Yeah.
looking in the wrong place. It's actually inside the student, right? And if you look at people who are really successful often in any area of life. And the people who maybe we often really admire, it's people who know themselves, and they charted their own unique path, right? Like, you're an English teacher, but you're also doing a podcast, right? So you must have figured out something about yourself
I
to
talk a
say,
lot,
like,
but
yeah, and I heard you say amazingly that some of your students suggested that you might do this, which is pretty flattering coming from your students.
yeah, this was their
But
idea. Yeah.
so that's amazing. That's amazing. But it's like, it's knowing that this is like how I'm going to fulfill myself, and this is the right thing to do. And I think people see that, and they know that this is someone who knows what they want to do, and they know how to navigate, right? They know how to make decisions to do the right thing for themselves. And I
Yeah.
think that just like, that never goes old, right? Like, that's just always valuable, and it just transfers to any situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great answer. I honestly, I asked it having no idea what the response was going to be there. I hate when I see the clickbait, like, oh, all these jobs don't exist yet. And I'm like, well, I mean, some of them
Yeah.
don't, but in the end, and you said, maybe someday you'll be stuck on Mars. And I don't know why it flashed in my head, but it's almost like you're trying to get students ready to, like, you don't know if you're going to land on Gilligan's Island or not, but if you
Right.
end up there, do you know which role you're going to fill and what service you
Yeah,
provide?
exactly.
Because if you
Do
get
you want a
there,
red shirt, or do you want a blue shirt?
yeah,
What do you?
where do I end up here? Um, and so having that sense of self and a general sort of understanding of my abilities, my skill set, maybe carries people farther than the specific decision that you're going to make about which individual job. If engineering is the way to go, maybe that's the really important part. Which form of engineering I choose, is maybe secondary to making sure I was in the right general field in the first place. And
Yeah.
if students can make those decisions with confidence and with knowledge, it's good. I love it. This is something we talk about a lot on this podcast, is how do we translate what we're doing in school to real life, quote unquote real life.
Yeah.
And maybe breaking down the walls in some like interdisciplinary studies and things like that. Like, that all comes up a lot. And that's a lot of, that's a lot of what you're doing here, is sort of take all the stuff, all the stuff you're doing, and help students to figure out what they want to do with it. And
Exactly. Yeah.
to give everybody a toolbox is great, but if you don't help them recognize which tools are going to be more useful for them, then we only got you halfway there. So I think it's something of immense value. We're gonna get ready to wrap up, and so I sort of end all these with two sort of pieces for the guest. And one is open mic. So if there's anything we didn't talk about you wanted to, or we moved through too fast, or whatever, you have free mic to clarify or say what you like. And then we'll wrap up after that with a couple book and movie recommendations of just whatever you're into. So is there anything you think we missed or you want to clarify?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I'm really impressed at how you kind of picked up on some of the key themes that we talk about and think about. So no, I'm pretty happy, and I don't want to get too preachy about it. Obviously, we're really passionate about career development, but no, I'm really happy with the ground we covered. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Cool.
thanks.
Then so the books and movies could be just for fun. It could be professional related stuff. It could be a blend. What are some things that you like to read and or watch that you think the audience might appreciate or maybe should check out?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how many people align with my taste, but so I'll share a couple of things. In terms of books, I do read a lot of career development stuff for sure. And one of the things that we talked about during the conversation is how the field is evolving and it's kind of opening up and becoming more modern. And in the past, it's very, very kind of scientific, I guess, and not as accessible. So there's a few books that I've read recently where people outside of the career development field, people who don't have a formal background, have really tried to map out how they made choices about their own future, and they're trying to provide advice for people in terms of how they would do that for themselves. And so some of these books I've found pretty interesting and pretty inspiring. So there's a mix here. The first one I'm going to share is really a business book and a time management book. You may have seen it, and it's about helping you make the best use of your time. But what it does that relates to career development, instead of saying, most of the time we think about, okay, what's our to-do list, and how are we going to organize that to get stuff done? But this book says, like, why are you doing that stuff? Like, where are you going? What is your purpose? What are you trying to accomplish? That helps you figure out what stuff shouldn't even be on your to-do list. You can just get rid of it and make sure that you focus on the important stuff. So I thought that was really interesting. And it's someone who's basically, talking about how to be efficient, but they're saying in order to be efficient, you kind of need to know who you are and what you're about and where you're going.
So
So I thought that,
it's 18 minutes, right?
yeah, 18 minutes.
18 minutes, yeah. That I've seen the book, like I've seen it somewhere online. I have not read it. But your description reminds me of the the idea's been floating around for a while, but the 80-20 rule. And some guy, I don't know, I didn't make it far in the book because this guy wrote, I don't know, I was listening to the audiobook and it was like 8 hours. And I was like,
Oh, no.
man, I'm 30 minutes in and I understand the 80-20 rule. Like, what are you going to do with the rest? You know what? I got
that's,
the 20
that's most
I
business books. That's most business books.
Like,
right?
I thought it was hilarious. I was like, the 80-20 rule, I already got the 20% I need. The other 80% of this book I'm not listening to return,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that sort of goal of prioritizing, making those decisions is huge in a lot of ways. And obviously, has the connection to say, the career preparation piece, but maybe that's just a good sort of personal development thing we could all use. I know as a teacher, I could certainly streamline a little bit.
Oh my goodness. Me too.
Nice.
Me too. So I've got a couple more for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one is a book written by Scott Adams, who creates the Dilbert cartoon.
Okay, how to fail at almost everything and still win big. I've not heard of it, but I love the title.
This is, again, it's someone else writing about their own story that has lots of good advice around career development. This is someone who really had failed at a number of jobs and then created their own career, right? Like said, like, this is what I'm all about. And it is, I think this, you were seeing it more and more today, like in the past. I'm not a young person. And when you grew up, you could be a teacher, you could go work in the factory, or you could go work construction. And you never really thought about this idea of like self-actualizing and like being your unique person. Today, of course, with YouTube and social media, like everyone is creating their own brand and their own unique identity, right? But this is a newer concept. And I think, he was really ahead of his time in that sense. He said, like, this is what I'm going to be. I'm going to do this particular kind of cartooning. These are the skills I have. I think these are the things that are unique about me, and I'm going to make it work. And it's just really cool, right? He'd failed at a number of things, and he had to figure out that he just had to lean into his own strengths and carve out his own identity.
Nice, very nice. Yeah.
So I'll give you one more, and then I'll stop talking about these kinds of books.
No, it's good. Love it.
So another one is this is a couple of professors at Stanford University.
So designing your life, right?
Yeah. So they're in the faculty of design, but they found that the same problem that I had when I was in university. A lot of their students have no idea where they're going to go, and so they wanted to do something about it, and they created a course about it, and it's now one of the most popular courses at Stanford. And it's really, again, just contrasting that research-based, authoritative approach to career development that we all would have experienced at one point with like design thinking, in career development, and saying like, this is like a design exercise. There's no right or wrong answer, but like design is making the best of your situation. Right. Your situation is your environment and who you are and that sort of thing. And now let's use design thinking, which is, doing research and then prototyping and then getting real experience and then testing your hypothesis and all of that. So just a really kind of cool and flexible approach to designing your life.
Awesome. That sounds great.
So,
all right. Do you have any others? I don't want to cut you off.
That's it. No, that's it.
So, I recently, just this year, I took a job in a brand new virtual school. So I'm all distance learning. Like, this is my podcast studio and my classroom, Cool. But I used to have a very long commute. And so I tore through books on Audible, and some of the best stuff that I've listened to over the last few years they've been like the random things that people have recommended on the podcast where they're like, yeah, no one's going to be into this, but, and then I'm like, I might like that last one, designing your life. I'm like, that's going to find its way onto the list. Like, I don't have much of a commute anymore, so the books take a little longer, but that one sounds really good. Out of curiosity, have you read, was it Andrew Yang's The War on Normal People?
No.
So no. It's sort of like some of these, it's sort of tangentially related to what you do. He wrote it a couple years before he ran for president unsuccessfully and whatever, but he's an interesting guy, entrepreneur, does all this stuff. But he basically talks, it provides a foundation for why he was so interested in universal basic income. And a big part of it had to do with what jobs are already being automated, what jobs are likely to be automated, and what people can be doing to find fulfillment and meaning in their life and still provide a useful service to their community. And so there are parts of it where, it was like, okay, I get the political piece is fine or whatever. But I thought he did a really interesting job of pointing out like the way automation and AI are likely to change the way we think about jobs and careers over the next 20 or 30 years. And then his whole thing is we should start making a bunch of little adjustments now, like a bunch of little things you do now that over time, if it's useful, it'll build. And if not, and it very much changed the way I give career advice to my students. Like when we start talking about what we're going to do, not that I say do this or don't do this, but it's sort of like it gave me like a more realistic awareness of like the way technology may shift and the way that may make you want to change sort of your goals or your values, or you say, well, I'm interested in this field. Okay, well, think carefully. What can you do that, say, a computer can't, or what's the thing, what's the value you add on top of it? And it wasn't, but there's a big piece of it in there that if you're reading it as a young person, you start thinking about like, how can I use this information, these ideas to make better decisions? I think if you read that book as an older person, it just seems like, well, everything's going to hell and I don't know what to do with it, but I reading it, thinking about my students, like I really enjoyed it, largely because he made all of the potential problems seem like things that can be handled if we think ahead and we make smart decisions. And so that's why I would toss that out. I haven't recommended that book in a while, but might sort of fit that general sort of related to what you do, but isn't exactly career, readiness and advising. It was a lot of cool ideas in the book that really got me thinking about some of that.
It sounds amazing. I really appreciate that recommendation. I'll look it up. And I mean, it's one of the core issues we face as a society, right? I mean, it's when these shifts happen with technology and the way they sweep through the labor market, it's cruel, right? And it's hard on people and it's hard on families. And so, to address that issue head on, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And to tie it back to Xello and all of your hard work, helping people to understand, themselves, their interests and their skills can help to navigate that, because when you hear somebody say, well, why don't those coal miners or truck drivers, why don't they just learn to, do computer programming? That's not a similar skill set. It's usually not a similar person doing it. And so, that is essentially just brushing someone's very serious concerns about their career and their livelihood. It's just brushing it off in a way that I think is disrespectful. It doesn't mean we can't find another job. It just means that when you're going to give someone the advice, hey, your job's changing, here's what you can do. We should be thoughtful and reasonable in the suggestions we make. And maybe if those people had been provided an opportunity to better understand their options, and maybe the job's similar to the one that they ended up in, it might be easier for them to pivot rather than, the government throwing, millions of dollars away on a computer programming training that really isn't going to stick for a lot of those people. You really have to know the people to get the right jobs, the right matches.
100%. It's not easy, and it gets harder as you get older. I can attest to that.
Yeah. So this has been the ClassCast podcast. I am your host, Ryan Tibbens. We've been speaking with Jeff Harris, the co-founder and president of Xello. Jeff, before we wrap up, is there anywhere where people can maybe track you down online, social media, websites, in case they want to learn more?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can visit Xello.world. And there's tons of great information there. We have a really active blog page where lots of information, not just about our program, but about career development in general. And we also have a YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and just type in Xello, again, lots of really good stuff. We have online kind of our own roundtable podcast style sessions monthly, where we're talking with educators about a bunch of different career development topics. Really, really proud of that. We have lots of thoughts on career development, but educators are the ones doing the real work. And so we bring them into the podcast and give them a chance to shine. And there's always tons and tons of great information shared there. So that's a couple of things I'd recommend.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, then you can find out more about Xello, Xello, at Xello.world and on YouTube. I'll link all that in the show notes. As always, you can find the ClassCast podcast on all major streaming services on YouTube and at ClassCastPodcast.com. Thank you very much. And everyone have a great day.